Did you know that there is one particular type of carbohydrate that in study after study has been shown to shrink the fat stored inside your liver, even in people who do not lose a single pound on the scales?
Most of us, when we think about body fat, we think about the stuff we can pinch, around our belly or our waist, the stuff we can see in the mirror, the stuff we are constantly trying to shift. But the fat that we cannot see, the fat packed deep inside your liver, is doing far more damage than the fat you can grab with your fingers.
And the buildup of fat inside the liver, which doctors call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, is now one of the most common chronic liver conditions in the entire world, and it is driving an enormous amount of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and other serious problems that I, Dr. Michael Carter, see week in and week out in my work.
And the really fascinating thing is that a run of recent research has shown that one particular kind of carb can help to shift that liver fat specifically. And the headline studies used around 1 cup of this carb a day, which is a lot more than most people are eating, by the way. Now, that carb is the humble legume. So, we are talking about beans, lentils, chickpeas, the kind of thing you chuck into a soup or a stew or a curry. And the name causes a bit of confusion, because although legumes are often grouped in our heads with starchy carbs like bread and rice and pasta, they actually behave in a completely different way inside your body. In this video, I will show you exactly what that does to your liver fat and your visceral fat, and then how I, Dr. Michael Carter, take that exact same lesson and apply it with real food at the family table. No powders, no supplements, no gimmicks, just real food that you can find in any supermarket down the road.
And if you find this video useful, like I always say, please just give it a like, subscribe to the channel, give the video a hype as well. It supports me so much, and I cannot thank you enough, everybody who has already supported me so far.
I cannot believe how quickly this channel has grown, and I will keep making these videos to help as many people as I possibly can. So, the first thing we need to clear up is what makes legumes different from the ordinary starchy carbs that so many of us eat far too much of without even thinking about it.
So when you eat white bread or white rice or pasta or cereal, the starch in those foods has been stripped of its fiber and its natural structure during the milling process. So it breaks down really quickly in the small intestine into glucose, which then floods into your bloodstream and causes a big spike in blood sugar. And when blood sugar spikes, your body releases a big surge of insulin to try and bring it back down. And insulin, remember, is a storage hormone. It is telling your body to store energy away, and one of the places it likes to store it is in your liver and around your internal organs.
So refined starchy carbs, eaten often, are basically an open invitation to your body to lay down more of the exact fat we are trying to get rid of. Legumes do something really different though, because they come wrapped in a tough outer coat full of soluble and insoluble fiber, and inside that they pack starch that is much harder for your digestive enzymes to get at, and on top of all that, they have a really meaningful amount of plant protein.
So the starch that is sitting inside a lentil, or a chickpea, or a kidney bean only gets broken down very slowly, and a sizable chunk of it actually never gets broken down in the small intestine at all. It carries on down, almost untouched, into your large intestine where your gut bacteria treat it as food. They ferment it, and in that fermentation process, they produce really powerful compounds called short-chain fatty acids, the most important of which is called butyrate, and if you watch many of these videos, you will know that I talk about butyrate quite a lot.
Butyrate is essentially fuel for the cells that line your colon. It tightens up the gut wall, it calms down inflammation, and it sends signals along the gut-liver axis that tell your liver to stop packing away as much fat. And that is exactly the same broad process that happens with proper fiber, which is why legumes count as a kind of hybrid food.
Part starch, part fiber, part plant protein, all working together at the same time. So instead of spiking your blood sugar and feeding fat storage, they quietly feed the bacteria that keep your gut, your metabolism, and your liver in really good shape.
And the evidence behind this is stronger than a lot of you might be expecting. So in a randomized controlled trial published a few years ago in a major nutrition journal, again the research link is in the description below, around 100 people with fatty liver disease were put on one of two diets for 12 weeks.
One group was asked to eat roughly a cup of cooked legumes every day. The other group was asked to eat an equivalent amount of calories from refined starchy carbs like white rice and white bread.
The legume group, without any other change to their diet, without any exercise plan, without any weight loss target, saw a real noticeable drop in the fat stored inside their liver, along with meaningful improvements in their liver enzymes on the blood tests. And most strikingly, much of that benefit happened without any meaningful drop on the scales at all.
The researchers traced this back to the changes in the gut bacteria, and the way those bacteria were now talking to the liver through that gut-liver axis we just talked about. And something else really interesting is that your visceral fat responds as well.
In a separate controlled trial, several weeks of swapping refined starchy carbs for legumes significantly reduced the deep visceral fat wrapped around the organs. The exact fat that I, Dr. Michael Carter, talk about all the time, because it is the fat that drives so much of the metabolic disease that we see these days.
The fat that drives the insulin resistance, the inflammation, the high triglycerides, the small dense LDL particles, all of that. So we are not just talking about a benefit on a scan of your liver, we are talking about a benefit on the actual fat that wraps around your organs and pushes your metabolism in the wrong direction.
So let's talk about this 1 cup figure for a moment, because it is quite a lot if you are somebody who never eats legumes at all. And the first thing to say is that you do not have to start there. The studies used a cup of cooked legumes a day, because that is the dose at which the researchers saw the cleanest, most repeatable effect on liver fat. So if you are starting from 0, you can build up slowly, a few spoonfuls at a time, a couple of times a week, gradually increasing to something closer to that cup a day over a few weeks. The point is the direction of travel, not the exact starting line.
And I think it is worth pausing on what a cup of cooked legumes actually looks like in practice, because it is a lot more approachable than people think. A cup is roughly what you get from half a tin of chickpeas, or one of those small tins of lentils, or a generous serving of dal, or a couple of big scoops of 3-bean salad. It is not a mountain of food. It is just a sensible portion of something you can build a meal around. Now, alongside all of this, there is a really elegant mechanism that scientists have mapped out for why legumes are so much kinder to your liver than refined carbs are.
So when you eat a lentil, for example, the soluble fiber around the outside forms a kind of gel in your gut. That gel slows down the rate at which the starch inside is broken down, which slows down how quickly glucose enters your bloodstream. Slower glucose entering means a smaller insulin response.
Smaller insulin response means your liver is being asked, far less often, to take glucose out of the blood and turn it into fat to be stored. And that gives your liver a chance, over time, to actually start releasing some of the fat it has already stored. Which is one of the reasons that in those studies, the liver fat came down even when weight on the scales barely moved. The composition of the body was changing underneath, even when the total number on the scale was not. And there is also a really interesting hormonal layer to this that I think is worth mentioning. Legumes have a low glycemic index, which means they trigger a much smaller release of insulin in the first place. They also seem to nudge the release of a gut hormone called GLP-1, which is the same hormone that some of the newer weight loss drugs are designed to mimic. So you get a gentle version of that satiety signal, that full feeling, that slow, steady curve, rather than a spike and a crash. And that is a big part of why people who eat more legumes tend to eat less, overall, without really trying. And let me bring this back to meal building, because that is where this becomes practical. So if you take a cup of lentils, or some chickpeas, or a few beans, and you build a meal around them with plenty of vegetables, and something with real crunch, and a good source of protein, and some healthy fats, you have turned what could have been a blood sugar bomb into a properly balanced, gut-friendly plate. Better still, if you go for a short walk afterwards, even just 10 minutes around the block, then your muscles mop up much of the glucose before it can do any harm. This is why I, Dr. Michael Carter, tell anybody who will listen that, if you are going to eat carbohydrates at all, swapping refined starch for something like lentils or beans is almost always the better choice. Same goes for the order in which you eat your food. Eat the veg and the legumes first, then the protein, then any starch on the side, and you blunt the glucose curve even further. It is a small tweak, but but it compounds over weeks and months. Now here is where it gets really useful, because you can actually get even more out of legumes with very simple kitchen tricks. One of the easiest things you can do is buy them tinned. Tins of lentils, tins of chickpeas, tins of black beans, tins of kidney beans, tins of butter beans, tins of cannellini beans. They are an absolute staple in our kitchen. We always keep about 6 or 7 different types in the cupboard at any one time.
And the reason that matters is that they have already been cooked in the canning process. The starch has had time to cool down inside the can, and some of it has actually reformed into the kind of structure that behaves much more like fiber inside your body.
So just by choosing tinned over dried and cooking them yourself, you have already nudged that meal in a much friendlier direction without really trying. The other trick, and this is one that I, Dr. Michael Carter, use all the time, is to cook a big batch of dried legumes on a Sunday evening, let them cool completely in the fridge overnight, and then reheat them during the week.
That cooling step, that retrogradation we have talked about in other videos, locks some of the starch into that harder to digest form. So a lentil curry you made the night before and reheated the next day is genuinely better for your blood sugar than one you have just cooked straight away and eaten piping hot.
The same trick works with tinned beans that you rinse, leave in the fridge overnight, and then use the next day in a salad or a soup. And if you are somebody who really struggles with the texture of beans or gets a bit of bloating from them, then here are a couple of really simple things you can do.
Soak your dried beans overnight in plenty of water with a pinch of bicarbonate of soda if they are particularly old. Throw away the soaking water, rinse the beans really well, and then cook them fresh in new water. That soak and rinse removes a lot of the compounds that cause the bloating in the first place.
And then if you introduce them into your diet slowly, just a couple of spoonfuls at a time a few times a week, your gut bacteria adjust over a couple of weeks, and it all becomes much more comfortable. Sprouting is another really lovely option if you have a bit more time at home.
So you take some lentils, rinse them, leave them on a damp tea towel for a day or two, and they pop little tails out the side. Sprouted lentils are easier to digest, they are even higher in some nutrients, and they have a really lovely fresh taste.
Tinned beans, by the way, are almost always well tolerated because the canning process has already broken down a lot of those harder to digest compounds, which is one of the reasons they are such a good entry point for people who are new to eating more legumes.
Now, as somebody who has worn one of those continuous blood sugar monitors for stretches of time, I can tell you the difference between a meal built around refined carbs and a meal built around legumes is really, really obvious on the trace. Same calories, roughly the same portion on the plate, but the curve from the lentil or chickpea-based meal is a gentle little hill rather than a mountain.
There is no big spike, there is no big crash an hour later, there is no reaching for another coffee at 11 o'clock to push through the slump. That to me is the most powerful demonstration you can have, watching your own blood sugar behave like that when you change one ingredient. And the effect compounds. Because when your blood sugar is smoother across the day, your insulin is smoother across the day, your energy is smoother across the day, your hunger is smoother across the day, and over weeks and months your liver is given the space to actually start clearing out some of the fat it has been storing. But you do not actually have to do anything fancy at all, because there are plenty of legumes that come ready to use in the most basic form. Things like lentils and beans and chickpeas already contain this combination of slow starch, fiber, and plant protein without any real preparation beyond that soaking and cooking I just mentioned. Which is one more reason that the longest living populations in the world, the so-called blue zones in places like Okinawa, in Ikaria, in Sardinia, in the Nicoya Peninsula, eat so many of these foods every single week.
In some of those regions, legumes are doing more calorie work than any other food group, and yet the rates of fatty liver disease, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes are a fraction of what we see in places that lean heavily on refined carbs. And the foods that are easy to build into a normal week are really not exotic at all. Red lentils cook down in 15 minutes for a quick dahal. Tinned chickpeas rinse straight into a salad, or get blitzed into hummus with a bit of tahini and lemon and garlic. A tin of mixed beans goes into a soup, with some onion, carrot, celery, a bit of tinned tomato, and a handful of greens at the end. Black beans and kidney beans go into a chili. Lentils go into a bolognese instead of half the mince. Cannellini beans get whizzed up with garlic and olive oil as a really creamy base for a toast topping. White beans get tipped into a tuna salad. Butter beans go into a curry.
There is genuinely an option for almost every kind of meal you would normally make, and once you get into the habit of just defaulting to a tin of something pulses in the cupboard, you stop noticing the swap entirely. Slightly underripe green peas, which are technically a legume, also fit into this family as well.
Properly intact whole beans, rather than the broken up versions, hold on to more of their structure and give you more of this protective effect. So if you can try and get these into your diet most days of the week, then over time you are doing something quietly powerful for your liver, for your visceral fat, and for your overall blood sugar control.
And that brings me back to this 1 cup figure that I mentioned at the start, because there is a fair point to make here. So in those studies, they asked people to eat around a cup of cooked legumes a day, because it is much easier to measure in a research trial, and because that is the dose at which they see really meaningful shifts in liver fat. The whole point here is not to be chasing that exact number every single day, it is to be taking a lesson from this research paper, and the lesson is that swapping refined starchy carbs for legumes is much better for your liver, much better for your blood sugar, and much better for your visceral fat than the alternative. So if you are going to be eating carbohydrates at all, then well, first of all, try and reduce the amount you eat over time, because we know those spike your blood sugar, but when you do eat them, get them from whole food sources like lentils and beans and chickpeas, rather than from white bread and white rice.
None of this is meant to be dogmatic. These are just little tips that you can do every single day that over time will have a really big effect on your insulin, on your blood sugar, and on the amount of fat your liver is having to store.
And as with most things I, Dr. Michael Carter, talk about on this channel, it comes down to trying to reduce the frequency and the intensity of your glucose spikes, because those are the things that underpin so much of the modern diseases that we see these days, the heart attacks, the strokes, the dementia, and certain cancers as well. So it means trying to reduce the intake of refined carbohydrates and to bring in more of these slow-burning, gut-friendly carbs like legumes, wherever and whenever you can. So this was a much shorter video today, focusing on a very particular point in a very specific research study, so I hope you found it